Hey everybody, thanks for watching. I hope you'll like, comment, and subscribe. All that helps with the algorithm. This week's guest is Reverend Dr. Mark Sandlin. Last week, I talked with Dr. Caleb about a lot of progressive ideas. This time with Dr. Mark, we kind of narrowed it down specifically to two different things. That Jesus is not the Son of God and that he didn't die on the cross for our sins. Those are ideas that are really deeply rooted inside of my mind, and so I have a lot of questions regarding that.
Oh man, I'm all pumped up, maniacs.
Welcome to the podcast, Reverend Dr. Mark Sandlin, minister at Presbyterian Church of the Covenant in Greensboro, North Carolina, and co-host of the Moonshine Jesus Show. How are you doing?
I am doing great today. How are you doing?
Good. You have the sickest beard in ministry, probably. You probably heard that before.
I appreciate that. It took honestly years to get it where I felt good about it. So that actually is a really high compliment.
You have to have heard it before, I imagine.
Once or twice. I actually hear it at the local dive bar more than I hear it from other ministers, but that's fine.
Yeah. So how did you get where you are now in terms of your progressive beliefs?
Well, it was kind of like a slow process for me. I actually was raised in a Southern Baptist church through like middle school. But I always was like highly curious about Christianity for some reason. I think it was because it was so important to my parents that it became important to me, but I was just curious. So I read a lot and studied a lot. And those kinds of things started leading me down paths that made me more and more curious about things I wasn't being taught. And so ultimately, I was in the business world and realized that I wanted to know more about my spiritual beliefs so much that I wanted to go to divinity school. And so I literally quit a decent job to go to divinity school. Because I felt there was so much more to learn, and ultimately, what I was taught there at Wake Forest University School of Divinity set me on a new path of recognizing that a lot of what moderate to conservative churches teach is just not true. It's not real in terms of what the Bible is really trying to do when you contextualize it. So it was a slow movement until kind of that door got kicked in. And then I was just voracious. I was like reading everybody I could, Diana Butler Bass, Spong, Ehrman, like everybody I could get my hands on. And it all started ringing more and more true with the message I saw Jesus teaching in the Gospels. So I was about to say that's the short version. It is a shorter version than what I could have done.
How do you define God?
God is this connective tissue between all life and living beings that wants and desires love for all of us and pushes us towards it.
What do you think happens when we die?
I have absolutely no idea. What I do know is that hell isn't part of the equation. Hell's a very dangerous concept that was set up out of just a few places it's mentioned biblically that's used to manipulate and put fear into people. And that's the worst kind of spirituality, is a spirituality you come at by being manipulated into it or being fearful going into it. It sets a base that you can't grow a healthy spirituality from. And biblically, they were almost always talking about something very different than our modern concept of hell, which really comes from Dante. So what it is, I don't know. Is there one? I suspect so. Even from a scientific standpoint, energy doesn't cease to be. So I think there is something. And there's lots of new work on parallel universes that are, and I mean legitimate work, not like science fiction fantasy, which I love, but legitimate work on parallel universes and stuff that could also be at play here. But bottom line, I don't know. And frankly, I run away from anyone who tells me they do know.
A lot of people hearing this is going to be the first time they've ever heard anything like what you're saying.
That's fair. There is a shock factor a lot of times when someone hears me for the first time. It's like, how can he still be a minister and say those things?
Yeah, they expect heaven right away.
Right. Exactly.
So as a pastor, I heard on your podcast, I listened to the most recent one, when you were talking about Trump and like kind of the threats involved there. As a pastor, how do you prepare for a potential second term for Trump? Because you do minister to a wide, diverse group of people who are going to be fearful, who are going to feel threatened by this. Like, do you think about that at all?
Well, I'm fortunate in that I'm fortunate that in my last church, they ran me out because of my beliefs, because of the things that I learned at divinity school and taught. We were growing a church, and ultimately a very small group of conservatives kind of pushed me out. That I'm fortunate because what ended up happening is I've ended up at a church that is progressive and are open to hearing the things that I want to talk about. So I'm at a place where a Trump presidency, a second term of a Trump presidency would scare them. And they're not so diverse that I need to balance that making sure that the folks who are might have supported him need the right kind of spiritual care, because they would. But this is a place where we can actually talk about it. We don't talk about it in terms of candidates at our church, but we do talk about it in terms of issues. So a lot of what we do is take the issues that are going to be important in this election cycle, whether it's the economy, LGBTQIA+, climate, reproductive rights, and we talk about them from an educated, spiritually insightful understanding of the biblical text. And so that's how we are kind of preparing, is to try to make sure that we are all have as much information as we could possibly have about these issues and ways of approaching it, so that when we have conversations with other people, we're able to be a little more informed and maybe help them be a little more informed before people go and actually start voting.
What makes the church the best vehicle for your agenda, your social change and justice that you want to see?
Well, I think it depends on the church. Some churches aren't necessarily the best vehicle for that at all, are they? I think for us, it's that we do have a group of folks who have a deep spirituality, which has led them to genuinely care for the world and for all the people in it, even the people they disagree with. There is this real passion about caring for them. And so looking at biblical messages that are about social justice and that type of thing lands really well with folks who already have this sort of spiritual bias towards loving people. So for me, that's a big part of what makes the church I'm at an important and good place for that kind of message.
Favorite Bible verse and favorite writer?
Oh, that's going to be tough. Right now, I'll go with Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly? I also like the New Testament text, I believe, help me in my disbelief. But I'm going to go with the Micah. My favorite writer in terms of theology right now is Bart Ehrman out of the University of North Carolina. His work is absolutely astounding, eye-opening, fair, balanced, and honest with the text and honest with the history that comes along with it. So that's where I would go.
Have you ever had a supernatural spiritual experience or anything like that?
Not in the last 20 some years. I think it's interesting. When I was in a more conservative spiritual community, I was more apt to find something supernatural in occurrences. So I've had moments where I'm praying and there's this darkness over me. At least that's how I would have said it back then. I'm out and I'm asking God for some sign that things will be better. And, a natural weather system occurs and all of a sudden quickly the clouds part and the sun's beating down on me. Well, there was a time where that felt very supernatural to me. But that was because I was kind of pre-stacked in believing that I might experience that kind of thing. It also is because there's a particular understanding of the providence of God, of how God interacts with the world that goes along with that. And once you start moving away from the sort of high providence of God, which for me personally, it makes more sense in my understanding of God, the idea that God creates some supernatural experience for an individual person gets greatly lessened that could ever actually happen. So I also haven't heard the voice of God. I know people who say they have. Good for them. I don't know.
This is some stuff that I talked to with Dr. Caleb.
Yeah.
And also I saw the YouTube videos where you've talked about it too, that Jesus was not the Son of God and that he he didn't die for our sins. Caleb explained it by, that, the Bible isn't inerrant. And so,
Sure.
that's kind of how he explained. But when I think about those verses, there's like a stack this big.
Well, and most of them come from Paul speaking to very specific groups of people who have very specific problems that he's trying to help them through. And so Paul he sometimes tells groups different things, because for him, it's the end result that matters. And he'll say whatever it takes to get them to the end result, which is to be better people and to treat each other better. But I think that to answer the question, I'd back up and talk about Son of God language. And part of what was going on with the Son of God language is to claim that Jesus was Son of God was to very specifically claim that Caesar was not, which was the language that was being used, that he was Son of God. So part of it wasn't necessarily that he was direct Son of God, but to claim that. And then in his teachings, you can kind of see that there is something of God in all of us. So we all are children of God. Even Paul talks about how blessed we are to be called children of God. So for me, that's kind of what's going on with the language there and why that language is used. And ultimately, I do think that Jesus then saves us, but just not from the fiery pits of hell. Jesus saves us from ourselves and from some of the times the human tendency to divide each other and to separate each other and find that some folks are better and more important than others. Jesus saves us towards the understanding that that if one person hurts, we all should hurt. And not that we all should hurt. We should just recognize that, because the fact is, when one person is being hurt, one person is being marginalized, in many ways, all of us are being hurt and marginalized. And there is no true spiritual freedom while that's going on. So I think that in his teachings and in the way that he confronted the Roman Empire, he showed us how far love will go for the sake of full inclusion of all people. And if that isn't a message that can save humanity, I'm not sure there is a message that can save humanity.
So Dr. Caleb, he said that Christianity is viewed as a religion of orthodoxy, but he views it as a religion of orthopraxy.
Right.
Is that something that you agree with, that it's more about what you do than what you believe?
It absolutely is. Your faith without works. Or as I just blanked on his name, but the great singer-songwriter, faith without works is like a song you can't sing. It's about as useless as a screen door on a submarine. It's just to believe something and it not impact your actions means that you don't actually fully believe it. You like the thought of it, you like to think about it, but if it is not directly impacting how you go about your life, how you interact with other people, then your belief really isn't quite as full and strong as you maybe once thought it is.
Some people might say that that's like, then it's more just like behavior modification, like that an atheist could be, could like follow the, taking care of orphans and widows and things like that. Like, what would separate Christianity from, just a really good atheist in that situation? Then
I don't think there's much separation between a good Christian and a good atheist, frankly. The big difference is that a good Christian gets to that point in part by following the teachings of Jesus, that that we recognize Jesus as a very important and significant spiritual person in the history of our lineage, who had a particularly tight and important connection and understanding with and of God. And that because of that, we use that to guide us in how we go about practicing our day-to-day lives. And yes, a lot of my closest friends are atheists, and I can tell you, they are some of the best people in the world. And I would be glad for someone to say that Mark, that Christian Mark, is almost as good as that atheist Caleb or whoever, you know. I was going to say, I said Caleb only because the person I was going to name, his name's also Mark. And I was like, oh, that's just going to confuse people. And then it just defaulted to Caleb. But one of my other atheist friends.
So the Bible verse, for by grace you've been saved through faith, so no one can boast. You know, I kind of think of the Pharisees. And what would you say to somebody that, like, the Pharisees kept, you know, they did all the good things, plus they added some of their own that was unnecessary. Like, what would you say to somebody, though, that, like, Jesus was not pleased with the Pharisees, but they did all the good things, you know?
He also talked about how the Pharisees would stand on the street corners and pray so that people would see them. So I think what we see is that Jesus understood the Pharisees, what good they did do, and they did lots more bad than they did good. They were doing to be seen doing it, which is a very problematic. Like, are you doing it for the right reasons? Are you doing it because you understand everyone deserves to be loved and treated equally? Or are you doing it to gain more power? You're doing it so that people will see you doing it and think how important you must be. And that way you get more support and more power and more control over people. And I think that's a big part of what was going on with Jesus' relationship with the Pharisees. And that relationship with the Pharisees of constantly calling them out is, like I said, for me, that's what put Jesus on the cross, was that the Pharisees were also part of the local government, and they did not like what he was doing. So that ended up getting him crucified. Back in those days, you didn't end up on a cross because people didn't like what you were saying. You did it. You got to end up on a cross because you ended up being a thorn in the side of someone who represented the Roman government. And that's what happened to him. We could get into the temple grounds and all of that, and how it pushed him into that place. But ultimately, that's what it was he confronted the powerful who were marginalizing other people. And a lot of times those powerful people were the Pharisees, and tried to destabilize their power structure and said that is not okay with God. And that's a frightening thing for people who are surviving off of their power structures.
I'm very much left leaning and everything, but like
Sure.
I still have a little like conservative ideology bouncing around in my head, and I'm like, because I don't believe in the concept of hell, and
Right.
but like I also have like the simultaneous thing of like, well, how do I explain this then? So that's like, so you're helping me with that.
I have like the thing I believe, the good thing. That's the thing I believe, and then there's this thing.
It's really tough, and right now you're actually in the boat of a good number of Christians who are recognizing that the biblical teachings lean towards a more social justice kind of lifestyle, and are beginning to live that out even more fully, but theologically still kind of sit in the middle ground or leaving a little bit leaning conservative, because that's what the most work has been done on. Like, most of what's out there kind of comes from that perspective, and it's there's just not enough folks doing the kind of theological groundwork for changing not just our social justice towards a more forward-thinking way of being, but also our theology about how we go about being Christian and what our belief systems look like. There's just not as much work being done on that, so it's completely understandable. And some of what happens when you go to divinity school is they kind of deconstruct you first and then help you rebuild it. And I think right now, and there's people who get mad at me, progressive folks who are good friends of mine who get mad at me for saying this, but I still think it's very true. Right now, we're really good at helping people deconstruct their old kind of hurtful theology. There's not enough work being done to help reconstruct right now. There are folks doing it, but it's a minority of people. We really need to be doing a much better job of helping people. If we're going to tear their belief system down, We want to be people who follow the teachings of Jesus and be loving people towards other folks. You need to make sure there's a pretty robust system for rebuilding that belief system.
Yeah, and I did talk to Caleb a lot about the things that, kind of debunking a lot of things. What are some things that, that you believe like Christianity is all about then, and what are some of the principles that you would rebuild on?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go real simple here. The core of the Christian message still should be God is love. And anything that isn't from a place of love and doesn't let a person know that they are loved, then it's not from God. And we need to stop claiming that it is. And a lot of hateful things are put into God's mouth, and they are clearly not coming from a loving place. And they clearly don't allow people to understand that they are loved. So I think that's one of the central things. And then stemming from that comes all of our areas of social justice. If you truly love people, then you want to be going about not just being a person who works with them and helps them and stands beside them as their voice is being heard, but also who goes in and looks at the systems that created an environment where those folks needed social justice of any sort. So systems that marginalize people and push them to the outside. A big part of what we should be doing as Christians, it's one of the things that got Jesus killed, is pointing at the systems that are marginalizing and hurting people and saying it's got to come down. It either has to be completely reconstructed or it's got to come down and be rebuilt. That's scary work. And we don't hear that a lot coming out of churches, but it's some of the core work. You can feed a person, and that's great. You should. But they're going to be hungry the next day if the system that made them hungry is still in existence and is still oppressing them that way. And churches are going to need to do a better job at recognizing that reality and saying, we're going to be a part of confronting those systems and demanding that they be changed.
There's all these councils that decided that, Jesus is God and like and that he did the sacrificial act of atonement and all that stuff. Like I put some of them down that were like key with deciding that and being like part of the foundation of why Christians believe that. But then I was looking into a lot, like, and the reasons to trust them. Like I looked up that like historical continuity. Like there wasn't anything that like really. I was like, these are not real, like, broad acceptance of doctrinal clarity. Like, what? Like,
what does that mean? I should.
So, like, a bunch of people accepted it.
Yeah,
and that's why we believe it.
That's why it's exactly. And worse yet, take the Council of Nicaea, the 325 one. Constantine was actually not. He was highly involved in deciding what came out of that. He put pressure on people to make certain choices. Sometimes the majority thought was squashed because Constantine thought that the minority thought would be better for him as a ruler. So he wanted that to become the Christian. So yeah, whatever is crap when it starts from a politically motivated cause. We should be checking all of these against biblical understandings, and not just a surface reading and not just a literal reading, but an exegetical reading where you go in and you say, what's the text? What's the content? What were they trying to communicate here? What was the environment that they were in? And what might they have been trying to speak to? And how does that then get applied to our modern day living? So, I have to say those councils, I don't stake a lot in most of those councils. We get the Trinity from those councils, and there's nothing biblical about the Trinity. It's not mentioned even one time in the Bible. And Father, Son, Holy Ghost never mentioned all together in the entire Bible. But the council decided that we should all believe in it. So a lot of us do,
But and there's like practical impact on Christian life, and like all this like stuff. I'm like, what? This is like just a bunch of blah blah blah. And I actually put that on the screen while you were saying that the Council of Nicaea was convened by Emperor Constantine, who had recently converted to Christian, and sought to unify his empire under a single.
And you know why he converted to Christianity? It wasn't because he believed in the Christian faith. He had this very just varying rulership that he was looking at with all of these different faiths, and he wanted a faith and tell everyone we're doing that was under one God, because he was one God himself, and that he could then use to bring his people together under this one faith. He didn't do it because he thought Jesus was anything specific. It was because it was a very convenient spiritual movement to use to control his people.
Yeah, and they would put politicians on some of these councils and stuff too, is what I read. Like, what? Like what?
It happened.
And it says,
Then the church hierarchy expects you to take it real seriously, and then they give you mumbo jumbo like you just read about why you should take it seriously. And all of it rings to me as you should take it seriously because it helps us control you.
Yeah, it sounds as if to me like
loving or kind or good about that. Go ahead, sorry.
It sounds to me as if like in modern day, we put Rand Paul and Ted Cruz on the church council, and now we're voting on something. What?
Hey, we laugh about it, but we ain't getting far with that in the politics in the U.S. right now. So it's funny and it's also scary.
Yeah, that's oh my God, I didn't even think of that. I didn't need to hear that. That's horrifying.
Sorry. I'm really bad at dropping the reality hammer out of nowhere.
But it's crazy, all these like established ideas, and then you like look into it and it's like, oh, they came out of like nowhere. Like this is like nothing.
Yeah. And well, a lot of people use progressive Christianity of ignoring the Bible, and if anything, it's the exact opposite. It's that we take it more seriously than most people. I take the Bible too seriously to take it literally. But it has great primacy over all those councils, over anything that I'm a PCUSA minister, anything that the PCUSA church has laid down and said, this is how it is. No, the Bible and a really good exegetical delving into of whatever text is pertinent always is going to outrank any other person's setting down rules and regulations and dogma. So the argument that progressive Christians kind of don't really pay attention to the Bible is almost the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And obsessed with getting all the tools that we can get to really parsect it and dig into it and understand it in the best way that we can 2,000 some years later.
Yeah. So they also, councils and stuff have also decided like what books of the Bible actually go into it and which ones were not. Like, do you have any reservations about certain books that were put in or certain books that were left out?
John, can we get rid of John? Can we get rid of the Gospel of John? Yes, let's get rid of John. So the Gospel of John was written well after the other three. And it's the only one where we get a lot of language about Jesus and God being one. We get Son of God in the other ones, but we don't get this content. There is a lot of mythology that happened and got put onto Jesus by the time the Gospel of John was written that I think is unhealthy and unhelpful in a modern spiritual life because it leads to some pretty bad relationships with other religions, understandings of who Jesus was and what he was trying to do, and even what God is or isn't. So that one I'd love to get rid of. Some of them, they make great choices. Like there's an infancy narrative, which is just, if you've never read it, it's like Jesus takes as a child, takes clay pigeons and touches them and they turn to life and they fly away. Or there was if I remember this right, it's been a long time since I read it. There was a bully who was causing trouble and Jesus bumped into him. The kid falls over dead. It's like there's some that they make choices about. But for instance, the Gospel of Thomas is this beautiful listing of Gnostic sayings of Jesus, which would be very helpful and could really be informative to a positive, healthy spiritual life. So, yeah, I'd say they got quite a bit right and quite a bit wrong at the same time.
That's so interesting. So tell us about some of your, do you have any projects coming up or anything? I know you have Progressive Christianity, that organization that you kind of work with.
ProgressiveChristianity.org. We're working on a new project for this election year called Take Back Christianity, where we're taking 8 or 9 of the largest hot button topics that are probably going to be part of the debate, particularly during the presidential election, and looking at what the far right says is a biblical take on those, talking about how that particular take is harmful to our nation, and then giving what we understand to be a more positive understanding from a biblical point of view of how to address those issues. So that's going on. I'm co-founder of the Christian Left, which is since we're talking politics, it's a Facebook group that I highly recommend you follow. We do lots of political stuff over there. And then, of course, you introduced me as co-host of the Moonshine Jesus show. If you are a geek of any sort, I want to encourage you to come and hang out with us. We look at movies and television shows that have a sci-fi or fantasy theme, but then we always bring it back around to theology and politics. So a lot of fun there. But those are the big things I'm working on right now.
What's your favorite movie?
My favorite movie is, without any doubt, Back to the Future, the first one. It will always be that. I literally can't imagine a movie that was better made for the time period that it's in. How about you? I'm curious what yours would be.
I have a really random one. It's like this mobstery type movie, Lucky Number 11. It has like Bruce Willis, Morgan Freeman, Josh Hartnett, Lucy Liu. It has a lot of the big names. Sir Ben Killingsley. It has the only It has the only scene that Sir Ben Killingsley and Morgan Freeman were ever in together. I think
that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Pretty impressive.
It's super violent and graphic. Like when I was a kid, I wanted to go to it. My grandparents took me, not knowing what it was, and I was like, "Oh, that looks good." And they took me out of the theater, and they were so mad. And they told the person like, "Blah blah 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 blah." Even though it's rated R. What were y'all thinking? I guess they thought because I wanted to see it.
That's great.
He wouldn't want to see a bad movie, but then right. So years later, I got it on DVD, and I'm like, "This is the best movie ever. I love it."
I love it. That's great.